Okay, well, last time and where we ended, I was just talking about the conversion of Constantine and then the changes that happened in the Roman Empire once Christianity became a tolerated religion, in fact, a favored religion. Just to review that, Constantine seems to have had some sort of vision or religious experience. It's not entirely clear. This was a dream or a vision during the day or something of that nature. We have different reports that told him that he would be able to defeat his enemy, Maxentius, if he put either the Cairo symbol or the cross on the shields of his soldiers, and he was successful, so he issues the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, which leads to toleration of all religions, not just Christianity. By the way, Christians tended to be in favor of religious liberty in the literature, so Tertullian says, why would you, God, why would you want someone to be forced to worship you? So later on they were not so keen on it, but we'll see why that is in a moment. Nevertheless, the Christian church by Constantine now becomes a favored religion within the Roman Empire, meaning that he uses state money to build churches. A lot of the churches in Jerusalem are built by his mother, Saint Helena. So supposedly she also found the true cross, right? Have you heard the story?
Yeah, right.
So she went to the morgue and took out the dead bodies and started throwing them like crosses, and when one came to life, she was like, it's that one.
We celebrate on September 14th.
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yes, we do. Right.
Probably didn't happen. She was a barmaid, actually, from Trier in Germany, so St. Helena, but it was Constantine's father married. So anyways, as I mentioned also, he then eventually went to war against the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. Remember, they divided it up into two sections so they could more easily manage their problems. But he was persecuting Christians, and so Constantine went to war against him, he defeated him, and he becomes master now of the whole Roman Empire, both East and West. So that he's perched in a very nice place between East and West and can manage the problems of the empire. He, let me go back to the map. Oops. So here in Constantinople, he establishes a new capital, which will then be, for the next 1,000 years, will be the capital of the, what we call the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, which will persist until
What did you do to students whose phones go off during class?
Basically what I just did there. Basically just very silent, and then... the Eastern Roman Empire, which will persist for another 1,000 years, until 1453, actually, when the Muslims will destroy it, so finally. Even though it's reduced really to just the size of the city itself by then. Anyway, so things are going swimmingly. He's banned lots of pagan forms of worship, simply sacrifice, as I mentioned last time. He's reformed the law code to make it more Christian. He gets rid of crucifixion, gets rid of gladiatorial games. He's the guy, by the way, who came up with the idea that the Sunday was a Sabbath, okay? So that where people should rest on the Sunday, okay? So that's him. In any case. So things are going swimmingly, and what do you know? You have a controversy over heresy break out again, okay? From this guy, Arius. This is our only known picture of him. When you're a heretic, in fact, the heretic, he's oftentimes called the heresiarch, the heretic of the ancient church. You don't get many pictures made of you. Also, his writings, of course, have not survived, except for a song he wrote to promote his ideas called the Thalia. So, interestingly enough, also the name of the female lead in the 1982 rock opera Xanadu. But the Thalia is essentially about his doctrine of the Trinity. Okay, so what happened? Okay, so round about the late teens, I guess you could say. I think this is about, I'm not remembering the exact date, I think this is like 316 or 317, sometime around there. Arius, who's a priest in the Church of Alexandria, is at this sort of morning meeting with his bishop and all the other priests. And they have people give a kind of theological disputation when they're having breakfast together, and meeting. And he gets up and he explains a very peculiar doctrine of the Trinity, and his bishop, Alexander of Alexandria, a little redundant, right, says, well, that's heresy, that's completely wrong, and tries to correct him. He says, no, I'm right, and, you're wrong. So they fought for a while, and then Alexander convened a council in Alexandria which condemned Arius. So Arius then went to Palestine and got a bunch of his bishop friends together, we wrote letters to, and they convened a council and they condemned Alexander right back, okay? So,
Wow.
So Constantine hears about this dispute that's breaking out in the Eastern Church. This is really an Eastern phenomenon, it's not really a Western phenomenon. And he views himself as being a patron of the church, right? So he writes a letter to both of them and says, well, this is really just kind of meaningless discussion. Why are you arguing about this? This is just kind of dumb. So just stop arguing with each other, okay? Because we need peace in the church. Now, to us this seems ridiculous, but to Constantine, you have to understand, he was not this sly political manipulator when it came to religion that a lot of people seem to think he was. That kind of portrait of him came about from a book that was written about 100 years ago by a guy named Jakob Burckhardt, who wrote a book called The Age of Constantine. You can get it in paperback now for I think $1.50 on Amazon if you really, really want to read it. But the newer research on him suggests that he was like a very sincere but extremely theologically inept theist, or Christian theist in kind of a general sense, I guess you could say. He would write sermons and then make his courtiers listen to them. He wrote some theological treatises too, which aren't that deep. But he didn't really understand what was going on. Okay, so nevertheless, even though he told them to stop fighting with each other, they kept on fighting with each other. And so he decided that he would have to then convene the Council of Nicaea, right? Originally, maybe they had the idea of Constantinople, but Constantine said, well, in Nicaea, it's the jet stream is coming from the other direction, so the air is a lot better there, so maybe you should, let's go to Nicaea, okay? So what was it that Arius was talking about that everybody was up in arms all over? So here's Arius' doctrine of the Trinity. Okay, so Arius didn't reject the Trinity, which is what Dan Brown claims. Dan Brown, of Da Vinci Code fame, says that Arius taught that Jesus was a mere human being. And you get that in some Sunday school material. In my Sunday school book when I was in the 5th grade, they said that. That's not really what he taught. I think that most people think that, think in terms of the two natures doctrine, and so they assume if Arius rejected Jesus' divinity, that he would have had to say that he was only a man. That's really not true. He actually technically didn't think that Jesus was fully human either, so... So in any case, so what did Arius teach? Well, Arius taught that the Father cannot change. He's absolute and unchanging. So then if the Father did anything, that would constitute a change, okay? Because if he decides one day to create the world, well, he's changing them, right? So because he's now taking a new action. Or if he decides to enter the world and to redeem it, then that would be changing too. So in order to solve this problem, God had to create an intermediary who would be changeable, and so would be able to interact with the world, right? So he created Jesus in the beginning as a way of interacting with the world. Okay, so he created Jesus, and then Jesus created the world, and then Jesus became incarnate, took on a human body, not a human soul though. So he wasn't fully human. He just had a human body, not a human soul. And then by being obedient to the Father, he showed how creatures could earn their salvation. So if they acted the way that Jesus acted, then they could also be redeemed. Okay? So God exalted him, and now as a creature, he actually does receive divine worship, which is kind of an interesting position to take, right? That creatures actually can receive divine worship. Okay, and so then, in order to mediate between himself and the world, he created the Holy Spirit as an intermediary between himself and the world, right? So he doesn't have to interact with the world anymore. He can have the Holy Spirit do it. So there's one God, and then there's like two lesser kind of intermediary gods, I guess you could say. This is what his teaching is. So the Holy Spirit is a creature of the Son. Now, where the heck did he get this idea from? before him had taught something like this. They definitely didn't have all their ideas about the Trinity right, at least not all of them did. But they didn't teach this, right? So the answer is, of course, no one really knows. There's different theories about how you get Arianism. There's, I think, about 3 or 4 different schools of thought. One that I find really interesting, though, and this is still a school of thought, is that if you think about where he got educated, he didn't get educated in Alexandria, he got educated in Antioch, okay, by this guy called Lucian of Antioch. Now, Lucian of Antioch was partially reacting to that heresy I was telling you about last week, modalism. This idea that the Father is the Son and the Son is the Father and the Spirit is the Father and the Son. They just appear differently over time, but really they're just all one person, okay? So Lucian's move then was to say, well, that's really, really bad, okay? So, well, we don't want to say the Father is the Son and the Son is the Father, so let's go all the way and say that they're separate entities, right? They're not simply separate persons, they're separate entities. So that's part of it, okay? This is part of where he gets the idea. But there's an even more intriguing suggestion that I've read recently. Okay, so Antioch, we remember Antioch from the beginning of our story, right? With Paul in Galatians. So remember the dispute that Paul is having with Peter in Galatians about works righteousness? Right, so the question there is, are we saved by our works? It's interesting how Arius teaches that we're saved by our works, and Jesus' intention is quite specifically to show us how we can be saved by our works. In the same city, isn't that interesting? Then when you go around 110 AD, okay, we talked about Ignatius, and he's dealing with Jewish Christians called Ebionites, who teach that Jesus is just a creature who, again, models for us about how we can obey the law and save ourselves by our own actions, right? Because if you think that Jesus is just a creature, then you're going to have an idea about how he saves different than if you think he's God. If he's God, he has to bring in divine power to save us from our sins. There has to be something greater than our own moral capacities. But if he's just a creature, he can just that implies that all that has to happen is for him to be a good model of how to be a good creature and obey God, right? So then in the next century after that, you have a guy named Paul of Samosata, who is actually a modalist. But again, he teaches that Jesus was adopted by the Father, okay, because of his good deeds, right? And then gradually became God, okay? He kind of integrated into God. It's kind of a weird idea. But in any case, so you see this kind of pattern of, first of all, this understanding of Christology where Christ is a really, really super good creature who gets adopted by God and then models works righteousness for us. So it could very well go all the way back to that Judaizing heresy that we have in Galatians. So that's a possibility. So that's my theory. Anyways, there's several others. Yes?
So 2 questions. One, where did you read that? You said you just recently read this, that new theory or something like that? Where did that come from?
That's Newman.
It's Newman? Oh, really? Okay.
Right, but he goes obviously in a different direction than
Yeah,
I
obviously. Okay.
Yes.
And so with Lucian of Antioch, so would you say he was like went for sort of like tritheism or something like that?
I guess you could say that. Except for Jesus isn't really God.
Okay,
Kind of
so
less than.
it's like divine entities or
Well,
something?
again, this is one of the thorny issues, right? So he's a creature, right? But he receives divine worship.
Right.
Okay, for us, that's really, really problematic. And of course, Athanasius and the rest of them will say, well, how are you going to be baptized in the name of a creature or worship a creature? This is what we do in our liturgies. We've always done. But I think if you're in the Roman world, where you have a series of gods, okay, that you do worship, and people can become gods if they're powerful enough, then this could make a little bit more sense. I'll come back to that, because I have another idea about this in regard to political theology. Yes?
If the Father cannot change, wouldn't creating Christ constitute a change?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
And as Athanasius will point out, well, then the Father would have to create an intermediary to create the intermediary, but then he'd have to create another intermediary to create that intermediary,
Right.
and then you see how we just go on further. So he says this is just a silly idea. So,
Right.
but anyways, yes. I mean, it was also rooted, I think, in Greek philosophy too, because in Plato's philosophy, you have this unchanging heavenly world, and so there's a go-between in the form of what's called the demiurge, and then, of course, in Middle Platonism, also, this becomes the logos, so which of course John calls Jesus. So people said, oh, well, it's kind of the same thing, right? So, anyways, okay, so that's Arius' theology. Okay, so he's now drugged to the Council of Nicaea. Here's my Council of Nicaea graphic. And yes?
Hey, just as a reference, where in this time frame that we're going through now did Scripture get canonized?
Well, there were some local synods in the early 400s. So in 418, there is the Council of Carthage, where Pelagianism is designated a heresy, but they also canonize the New Testament. So it's a local synod, though. It's not a universal ecumenical council.
So they had access to Scripture, but it wasn't canonized into one collection yet, is it?
Well, people made up lists.
Council of Trent.
The Council of Trent is really the first council that claims to be ecumenical that canonizes Scripture.
Okay.
And that's in the 16th century. This is one of our arguments against the Catholic Church. They say, well, things are canonical because we canonize them in councils. And we say, but there was really no councils for hundreds and hundreds of years after the New Testament. And people quoted Scripture authoritatively. And when there were local synods and didn't have the force of a universal ecumenical council. And so by your own standards, you didn't have any Bible until the 1600s, right? So anyways.
Okay.
If you still got those slides I gave you last time, there was like a diagram on there that deals with that. It's kind of cheesy, but I don't know. Showing a timeline of...
Oh, yeah, with like the Unitarian canon.
Yeah,
and
sure,
things like
that's
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely send those to you.
Send that.
Send the other.
I remember it being kind of cheesy in some way, but I can't remember what.
It's cartoonish looking.
Maybe that's why.
That's all it is, yes. Yes?
Yeah, it was on the previous site. Part of his teaching, I understood, is that Christ's crucifixion and death as atonement was a moral example. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, his works are a moral example.
Yeah, well, because it just struck me as that, some of the newer theories on atonement theory, the moral atonement theory.
Well, yeah.
It's cutting edge, but it's kind of like recycling of
Sure. Well, right, and notice that those tend to correlate with Christologies that designate Jesus as only human. So Unitarians would agree with that as well, that they only think Jesus is human. So the closer you get to just saying that Jesus is a mere human, the closer you're going to get to saying humans aren't all that bad off, and that they can just earn their salvation on their own. But if Jesus is God, then something really extreme had to happen. I mean, you have to be really bad off for God to enter the world and have to turn you around completely. So. Any other questions?
You want the clicker? I forgot to give it to you.
It's okay. I'll hold
Sorry,
it.
my bad.
No problem. Okay, so Council of Nicaea. So there's a range of opinion of the Council of Nicaea. The Orthodox people are only a small group of people. Okay, so this is a nice thing for us too, because in the 16th century, the Orthodox Church was a very small percentage of the population. As Luther said, in the 1st century, it was Mary and Joseph for a while, right? So they're a very small group. Most people buy into, remember we were talking last week about that theory of subordinationism. This is the idea that Jesus is God, but he in some sense is less than the Father. Okay, so they want it both ways. They want to say, well, he's less than the Father, but he's also still God. Okay, this is kind of my response then to a lot of Anglicans and Catholics who will say, well, Orthodoxy is really balancing out two extremes always. It's like, is God one or many? Well, he's both. Is Christ divine or human? Well, he's both, And so then they say, well, and so my response is, well, no, sometimes it really is one or the other. Is Jesus God or is he not God? If he's God, then he's equal to the Father, okay?
Yeah.
Is it free will or is it God's grace? It's God's grace.
Yeah.
So, in any case. So they kind of want it both ways. But Arianism was really a bridge too far for them, okay? They don't want to say that the Father created the Son. There are those people. Then, of course, there's sort of people who are Arians who want to say the Son was created out of nothing, and there was a time when he was not. These are sort of their slogans. And then there are people who are kind of semi-Arians, and these are the people who are led by two people named Eusebius. There's Eusebius of Caesarea, who wrote the church history, the first church history, okay? And we know a lot about the early church because of this guy. And then there is Eusebius of Nicomedia. And they want to say that the Father created the Son, but they don't want to say quite how that happened. They don't want to say out of nothing, because they quote Isaiah 53, who can speak of his generation? Well, how can we speak? They take generation to mean how he was generated.
No.
Right?
That's interesting.
In any case. So that they'll say, well, we don't want to go the full Arian, but, we're close. In fact, they were very sympathetic to Arius. They felt that Arius was wrong and kind of condemned. In terms of the use of Scripture, this is kind of interesting. Arius's primary text that he's using is Proverbs 8. Okay, so where wisdom is spoken about, and it talks about before, all my works, God. Well, in the Hebrew, it's brought me forth. Okay, and in the Greek, it was created me. So he says, oh, well, created me. Well, there you go. So. We would say, well, why didn't they just go back to the Hebrew? Well, they didn't know Hebrew. And then on top of it, too, they believed that the Greek text was divinely inspired. So this is a common belief in the early church that they took over from Greek-speaking Jews, that the translation of the Greek Old Testament actually itself is divinely inspired by 70 translators. Okay. Justin Martyr actually argues with the Jews, and they complain, well, you keep on quoting the Greek. And he's like, well, but the Greek's obviously divinely inspired. Haven't you heard of the 70? Right, so in any case, anyways, what the Orthodox party, I guess we could call them, led by Alexander, and then his secretary Athanasius, is able to convince the other groups of people is that Arianism is simply a bridge too far, and so you have to come up with a kind of word to designate that the Father and the Son are united in one divine being. Okay. And, they maybe interpret it in somewhat different ways, but just as long as you can have some kind of creed that definitively says that Arianism is out. So hence they come up with the First Nicene Creed. This is not the one we say in church, by the way, so this will look familiar, but it will be unfamiliar as well. Okay. So, as we notice that all this stuff about the Son is in there. What do we notice about the third article?
Wow, short.
Pretty short. I believe in the Holy Spirit. That's it, right? So they believe in the Holy Spirit. So that's good. Okay, but of the Son they say, one Lord Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, so he's unique, okay, eternally begotten of the Father. Now that is an interesting one because that's taken from the term eternally begotten. Now, of course, this is a biblical idea. Since the Father does beget the Son, we're told this, and he's always in the bosom of the Father. But the term eternally begotten comes from a 2nd century theologian, Origen, okay, who is the first person to actually identify the figure in wisdom, the figure of wisdom in Proverbs 8 with the Son. Before then, it had been designated as the Spirit, okay, because it's a feminine figure, and the Spirit in Hebrew is ruah. Okay, so. I think exegetically it makes more sense because Paul in Colossians and 1 Corinthians does identify Christ with the wisdom of God. But Origen says all these people who say that the Father begat the Son at the time of creation, so these subordinations, are wrong because the Father was always with his wisdom. So hence we get the term eternally begotten. So that's from Origen. God from God, so he is God too, and he's generated by God. Light from light, again, another common metaphor that they use. They also use like a fountain and a stream, okay, to just show what kind of relationship the Father and the Son have. True God from true God, begotten, not made. So begotten means generated out of the substance of the Father rather than created, as Arius had claimed. Of one being with the Father. This term is, at the bottom, homoousia. Homoousia, so of the same being as the Father, we might say, or he's a single God, a single entity with the Father. Okay. Now this term will cause a lot of trouble because in condemning modalism, in an earlier council, people had designated the term to describe the relationship between the Father and the Son, heterousia, of utterly different substance. But the reason that they did this is because the term ousia, substance doesn't mean stuff something's made out of, but substance is a continuously existing entity. So my arm is an entity, but it's not a substance. I, as a whole, would be a substance, okay? So this is used interchangeably with hypostasis or prosopon, which would be the term they use for person. So when people hear this for the first time, who are very worried about modalism, they think that the council has promulgated modalism. So that will be a problem that they'll face. And then all the other stuff about his redemptive power and all this sort of thing. And then, of course, I believe in the Holy Spirit. So the key term is homoousia here. So anyways, the council then adjourned, and people either went home and got really mad because they thought the council was teaching modalism, or they put the creed on the shelf and they just went back to being bishop like they had always been. But again, this charge of modalism really kind of increased over time, and so you had various attempts at compromises. You had people who were semi-Arians who were proposing maybe a new formula of homoousia, okay, of a similar substance to the Father. Okay. That was a possibility. You also then, well, a couple of other developments happened. For one thing, Constantine kind of got soft on Arianism. He had semi-Arians in his court, so both Eusebius of Caesarea and Eusebius of Nicomedia, okay, were in his court. And he eventually decides that Arius should come back. After the Arians refuse to sign the creed, they are exiled north of the Danube, where they convert the Germans to Arian Christianity. So when they came in to invade the Roman Empire, they were already Arian Christians. So it kind of actually made the Catholics' job a lot easier, because all they had to say is, well, you just have to change a word in your creed. You can have this wonderful, powerful ally in the Pope, and they're like, yeah, we don't even know what any of this means, so okay, so I guess that we'll do that. But in any case. But he invited Arius to come back, and he insisted that the Church of Alexandria accept him again. Okay, and the Church of Alexandria was very nervous because, on the one hand, they didn't believe that he seriously was going to sign on to the creed, but on the other hand, they didn't want to go against the emperor, and so they were kind of, as he was walking into town, they were kind of vexed as to what to do about him. And on his way into town, he went to a latrine, and in the latrine, according to the church historians, his guts exploded out of him. So that kind of, took care of that, I guess. So, like Judas in the book of Acts. Anyways, I don't know if that really happened. Maybe it happened. I mean, maybe God really just didn't like him that much. So, but in any case, okay. So, in order though to work out the terminological problems, you then have a group of people called the Cappadocians. By the way, before we move on to the Cappadocians, can you think of a reason why, what we know about, in light of what we know about how the Roman emperors were worshipped, why Constantine might be more interested in Arianism than he would be in Nicene Orthodoxy? What if Jesus is not God, so that he's utterly different than us, but a really, really powerful being, okay? What does that say about the emperor?
He's on the same level as Christ?
Yes, or at least he's at least in the range, right? So, okay. Right, so Eusebius, who's of course known for the church history that Paul Meyer wrote this wonderful commentary on, is a great book too, wrote a little piece about Constantine called In Praise of Constantine, and it's about how great Constantine is. In fact, Constantine is the new Jesus, right? Because he is the most self-composed person since Jesus, right?
Hope and change.
Pardon me? Hope and change. No. He's most self-composed because this is the idea in Stoic, this is an ancient philosophical tradition, political theory, is that you have to be self-controlled, and so only people who are self-controlled can control the populace as well. Okay, so, and then on top of it, he's just like Jesus because when Jesus was on the cross, he was defeating the demons of the air because the air is filled with demons. Okay, and that's why he had to be up in the air on the cross, right? So. This is a common belief of Hellenistic people that the air is filled with demons, hence prince of the power of the air. So, yeah. But Constantine defeated the barbarians, and they were the demons of the land. Right? So, So in any case, so he's a new Jesus, right? So you can see, and you can of course see this in later forms of Eastern Orthodoxy in terms of their political theology. And now of course they get rid of Arianism, but the emperor is always like the big guy in the Eastern Empire. And then of course in Russia as well, the Tsar becomes, the big guy too. The Tsar of course means Caesar, and the term that ordinary Russians would address the Tsar with is, I think we translate the term thou, and you only address God that way, and the Tsar. Okay, so in any case, so we got it back again with Tsar Putin, right?
So are there any Arians today?
The Jehovah's Witnesses. Right, the Jehovah's Witnesses are Arians. But no continuously existing Arian church, because as we'll see, Arianism was then punishable by death later on. So, but anyways, Athanasius. Well, Athanasius was, of course, a very tenacious defender of orthodoxy. So he's one of the reasons why the Nicene Creed survives, even though you then later on get semi-Arian emperors who then persecute the true church, and actually the majority of the church falls away to Arianism. Okay, again, this is something for us to think about. He's exiled a total of 5 times. He was a great confessor of the faith. He was not a perfect person. He did hire gangs of thugs to beat up his political opponents, his theological opponents, but a great witness to orthodoxy. The people who really ultimately work everything out and are able to satisfy the legitimate concerns of people about terminology, are the people called the Cappadocian Fathers. These are Basil of Caesarea, Gregory of Nazianzus, and Gregory of Nyssa. Gregory and of Nazianzus and Basil were actually brothers. Gregory of Nyssa, and they were all bishops too, except for Basil and Nazianzus thought that Gregory of Nyssa was a really bad bishop because he wasn't harsh enough in terms of assigning penances to people for their sins. But in any case, he was a softy. But in any case, they wrote a series of books about Trinitarian theology. Originally, they were part of this party that wanted to talk about a similar substance because they wanted to preserve the threeness of the Trinity, but also the unity of God. And they thought that was a more appropriate terminology. But then they gradually realized the problems with saying that. And so they made a distinction between substance, which is the reality of a thing, or a substance is, of course, identical with itself. So, as I was saying before, I, as a whole, am a substance. Okay, I'm a single entity. My arm is part of me. It's not a substance, even though it is an entity. And person or hypostasis. Actually, hypostasis would be more thing. Prosopon would be person. So, a individual instance of a thing. Right, so the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are different hypostatoi, I guess we would say. So they're different persons, or different things, I guess, but they're not different entities. They're a single entity as one God. And so this distinction, this terminological distinction, which they got by modifying some kind of Greek philosophical terminology in some new and creative ways, ended up kind of satisfying most of the intelligentsia within the church. And so then you have the Second Ecumenical Council, led by Gregory of Nazianzus, at Constantinople in 381. So this is the creed that we get out of it. And this is the creed that, well, I'll see if you notice. There are some differences between this one and the one we say in church. So let's see if you notice it. So this one, it addressed a few other things. There was a heretic called Apollinaris who denied Jesus had a soul. Okay, so that's why it was changed to he became incarnate and was made man, so that, we're clear that he's a full human being. Okay, but now we get the Holy Spirit in the third article, because again, there was not only people who were Arians still around, so you want to reaffirm the anti-Arian aspect of the creed, but you now also want to affirm that the Holy Spirit is divine, because people started claiming that the Holy Spirit was just kind of an energy or something like that, too. So the third article now. I believe in the Holy Ghost, the Lord and giver of life, who proceeds from the Father, and who with the Father and the Son together is worshipped and glorified, who spoke by the prophets. Does that all sound right?
And the Son.
And the Son.
Yeah, Easter.
Yeah.
Well, this was
This is the original.
This is the original one. We Westerners added in "and the Son" in the 500s without asking them, so they were kind of annoyed by that. The Western argument is quite good, though. It's that not only does the Son give the Spirit, but in giving all of himself in begetting the Father also gives the Spirit along with the Son. So the Spirit must also proceed, we might say, through the Son also. So in any case, it probably could have been, not to get too far ahead in the future, but it probably could have resolved with per filium, through the Son. Okay? What their concern was not only that the West was introducing new terminology to the creed without actually asking them, okay, but that we were introducing a second principle into the Trinity. Okay? So what they wanted to be clear is that the Father was the source of the whole Trinity. So in any case, but so per filium, we can have per filium maybe as a compromise formula. But so yeah, there you go. So that's the final creed. Now this was done with a Christian emperor called Theodosius. They had had some trouble. They had, like I said, they had Arian emperors. They had also had a pagan emperor come to the throne again, Julian the Apostate, who I mentioned here very briefly. He reinstated sacrifice. Eventually, he decided he wanted to be like Alexander the Great and attack the Persians, but then he ended up dying in the Iraqi desert. And one of the generals just kind of standing around, who then became emperor, was a Christian, thank God, right? And, but eventually a Spanish general become emperor, whose name was Theodosius. And Theodosius approves of this, and then sets out a decree saying, this is the basis of all illicit religion in the Roman Empire. We've had too many problems with having pagan and Arian emperors coming to the throne and then persecuting the church. So anyone who does not agree to this creed, which is what Peter originally brought to the Romans, will be executed. Okay, so from that point onward, until like the 18th century, this was, you would die if you didn't agree to this, or publicly were teaching against this, okay? Which is why our Book of Concord has the creed as the first thing, to prove that under imperial law, that the Lutherans are a licit religion, a religio licita, okay? They were trying to prove that under imperial law. So this gets incorporated in the Code of Justinian then, who's a later Byzantine emperor. Then in Italy in the 11th century, it becomes, based on these legal scholars in Padua, it becomes the law of the Holy Roman Empire. And so then all licit religion in the Holy Roman Empire at the time of the Lutheran Reformation has to be based on this. So they want, that's why, how and why they were appealing to the emperor, saying we are a licit religion under the empire according to this. Okay, so that's why it's important. That's why it's the absolute first thing in the Book of Concord is this creed. And that's the end of this. Any questions? So that's Trinitarianism. Yes?
On the Stoikoi controversy, I had heard reading or heard someone said that part of that was because the Eastern and Western Church, the Western Church was growing more and more Latin in its language, and the Eastern Church was Greek. It was part of this was the dynamic of two halves of the church speaking totally different languages and kind of causing.
Well, they definitely didn't read each other's theology, so that's true.
So you think that does have this was really interesting. I never heard that.
Well, yeah, I don't think that the Western Church understood the Eastern Church's concerns, and I don't think the Western Church understood the Eastern Church's concerns. Because they didn't read each other. As we'll see, Augustine didn't even read Greek, which will have some interesting effects. Any other questions? Yes.
One question. It's a little bit off topic. Back one slide on the creed. What was the punctuation part of that?
Oh no, they didn't have any punctuation.
Okay.
And they wrote in all capital letters with no spaces between the words.
Okay.
It's like Charlemagne for.
Okay, because the clause giving credit to Christ as Creator, the way maybe it's our ignorant English interpretation, but the way you look at it, some misinterpret that to be referring to the Father instead of, it shouldn't be interpreted that way, but it has been.
Oh, okay.
That's usually just a matter of trying to, and that's why I like the punctuation in there. I just want to part of it.
I think that was from the Book of Common Prayer I found on the
Okay.
internet. Any other questions? Okay, let's talk about St. Augustine. Okay, we've been in the east with the Greeks, and now we're going to go to the west to the Latins. Now we're back in North Africa. This is Augustine, and he is the father of Western theology. He's obviously not the first Westerner to ever do theology, but the main concepts that we live and kind of breathe with, or in, so to speak, come from him. Now, you're not going to, of course, agree with everything that he says here. Excuse me. I think you'll be surprised how much you do agree with it and how much you just think in terms of his categories. But even if you don't agree with his thinking, probably some of our doctrines were formed on the basis of rejecting what he said on the thing. So either way, you can't escape it, right? So he's sort of like Bertrand Russell in his History of Philosophy says, everything in Western philosophy is a footnote to Plato. So either people agree with Plato or they don't agree with Plato. Okay, so he's a North African. His father is a pagan and his mother is a Christian. He is descended both from the people who were Latin-speaking immigrants from Rome, but also Berbers, who were kind of North African tribal people, and some of the Punic peoples. The Punic peoples were the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians were descendants of the Canaanites, okay, who traveled all over the Mediterranean as the Phoenicians, right, and they settled all over the place. So, and the Romans had fought several wars against them, 3 wars against them, which kind of ended up defining Rome as an empire. And they had ended in a very bitter way. The city of Carthage had been destroyed, and all the farmland had salt sown into it. And so the native population really, really hated the Romans. Okay, this will actually be important for our story later on, because people have long memories. We have very short memories, but they have very long memories. So he's kind of mixed of the native population and the Latins. His mother's a Christian, and his father's a pagan, as I said. He was bishop in Hippo, which is in modern-day Algeria. He himself famously was not a Christian growing up, but by the time he was in his 40s, he became Christian, and his career is sort of defined by these 3 controversies that we're going to go through: the Manichaean heresy, the Donatist heresy, and then the Pelagian heresy. Initially, his goal was to become a teacher of rhetoric, and so when he was a young man, he ended up going to Carthage and going to their rhetorical school, the school of how to speak and how to argue and things like this. He actively rejected Christianity, mainly because he thought the Bible was poorly written. He thought Latin literature was much nicer. And he also, another big problem he had was he thought that the God of the Bible was sort of a monster. He's wrathful sometimes. He judges people. He thought that was crummy. And he also couldn't explain how it was the case that there was evil in the world, but there was a good God. So for all these reasons, he rejects Christianity. So he then wants to go up to Rome to study in Rome, or not study in Rome, to become a professor in Rome. And he was about to get on the boat, and his mother came to the dock and said, "Well, you can't abandon me here. You got to stay in North Africa." And he said to her, "Well, you've made a convincing argument. Just let me go say goodbye to my friends." So then he got on the boat and then left on the dock. And he then went up to Rome and taught rhetoric. He set up his school. Unfortunately, he didn't realize that you should ask your students to pay first. So he said they would take his classes and then they just run away, right? And this is, of course, an important skill to have, because to enter the Roman bureaucracy at this time, you had to have these rhetorical skills. Eventually, he smartens up, and then he gets a girlfriend who he lives with outside of wedlock, and has a son by her. At the same time, too, he gets involved with this group of folks called the Manichaeans. Okay, so let's talk about the Manichaeans a little bit. What's Manichaeism? Manichaeism is a heresy or a different religion. It's sometimes designated one way or the other, mainly because it does talk about Jesus and views him as being divine in some sense, but there's also a bunch of other things mixed into it. Mani was from Mesopotamia, and that was on the border between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire, and so there were influences going back and forth. So there was Gnostic Christianity, Ebionitism, which is a Jewish Christianity, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism. He actually went even to Afghanistan and studied Hinduism for a while, and so he kind of just mixed all these things together. And what he came up with was that there was two principles in the universe at war with each other. One was good, and the other was evil. So the one that was good was identical with spirit and light, so physical light. So physical light is literally goodness, and physical darkness is actually literally evil, okay, as is matter. And they're sort of fighting back and forth with each other. And both of them are equally powerful, and neither one's going to really win. But if you get on the side of the good principle, you can stop getting reincarnated and then go to this wonderful spiritual heaven when you die. So,
Little yin yang.
Yeah, I was just going to say something.
yin yang are two sides of a common principle, and they're not good and evil, they're both good. So, not quite.
Male and female.
Right. Anyways, okay, so Augustine liked this a lot because he thought it was kind of intellectually engaging, and also it was a really good way of explaining how there's evil in the world, right? So, I mean, there's an evil God out there, right? So, it makes more sense that there's one good God, and then somehow he let evil happen, right? So anyways, he gets involved in this, and eventually he goes to a regional meeting of the Manichaeans, and the Manichaean bishop is there, and he asks him a bunch of questions, but the guy can't answer any of his questions. Okay, so Augustine is like, this is crap. And so then he leaves the Manichaeans and gets interested in Platonism. And in Platonism, that also provided a pretty good explanation about why there was evil in the world. Evil was just the absence of good, so that was good. He thought that was interesting. So anyways, his mother then shows up and says, I have a great opportunity for you. There's a girl up in Milan who is from a wealthy family. And since the upper classes are now all converting to Christianity, all you got to do is go to the catechetical school there and get trained in Christianity, and then get baptized, and you can marry her, and then, you know, all your financial dreams can come true. And so he makes the trek north and enters into the school of St. Ambrose. So Ambrose is a really smart guy. He knows Greek. He's read all the Greek theologians. He had even dabbled in imperial politics and had opposed the Arians, and actually even caused the emperor to do penance for killing some people at Thessalonica, and so forth. And he listens to his preaching and his teaching, and he gradually begins to find Christianity like really convincing, okay, and intellectually engaging. In fact, a lot of his problems with the Bible, Ambrose pretty much clears up by explaining the text better to him, also using allegorical interpretation, which was fairly current in the church at the time. By the way, what happened to his girlfriend and his son? Well, he threw her under the bus so that he could marry the other.
There were buses.
Yeah, buses. Under the chariot. In fact, in Confessions, which is his autobiography, we don't even know what her name is. She's just like some unnamed woman who he says he actually really loved. So, but anyways, so he's not quite ready to convert to Christianity yet because he doesn't feel like he's ready to give up sinning, particularly his sexual sins. But eventually, he's reading a book about the desert fathers, these people who went out in the desert in Egypt, okay, who were Greek Christian monks. And he's like, wow, I literally wish I could be like those people. And he hears a child singing, and he hears a voice that says, open and read. And so he goes to Romans, I think it's Romans 10, and the line he reads is, not in drunkenness and orgies, so on and so forth, but in, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ in newness of life, or something like that. And he's converted at that point. He's baptized. His son is baptized too with him. And he then decides he's going to set up a monastery. So he sets up a kind of monastery where his mother kind of lives with him and some of his friends, and his son comes there as well. And they just have kind of theological discussions all day. And this could have gone on forever, but unfortunately, a plague comes through and kills everybody except for him, basically. His son and his mother and then everybody else. And so he's left alone. So he decides then to end up going back to North Africa, where he's going to establish another monastery. But unfortunately for him, in his hometown, Hippo, a mob grabs him and then ordains him priest. That's one way to get ordained, I guess. So,
That's how it happened to me.
and, he's a smart guy. He's very learned. And so he ends up, making a name for himself. And so when the local bishop, dies, the other bishops say, hey, you should be bishop. So then he becomes bishop, and he ends up doing all kinds of things he didn't want to do. He just wanted to have a monastery and read books and write. But instead, all morning, as you remember, Constantine made all the bishops judges, so he has to listen to people's disputes with each other and judge. And he preaches every day, okay? Has to preach every day. But he ends up also being very productive theologically. He writes tons and tons and tons and tons of books. So in any case. So the first conflict he ends up having is with the Manichaeans in North Africa, because they're around there too. Okay.
So does he marry this gal or no?
Oh no, he's celibate for the rest of his life. So. In fact, as we'll see, he views enjoying sexuality at all as a punishment for sin. So that's how God punished us.
Interesting way to punish.
Yes. But anyways, we'll see why that is. But no, so he's a pure celibate for the rest of his life. No, he never gets married to her.
And the Te Deum probably wasn't sung at his baptism.
No, it was not sung at his baptism. At least I don't think. It would be cool if it was. But.
It was.
Okay, so this is Manichaeism. Of course, here are the problems from a Christian perspective. I don't have to fully go through these for you. Those mainly for my students. But anyways, what's his response? So he has all these Manichaeans around. Manichaeans have a really bad name, not only because they're against the state religion, but because they're associated with Persia. And Persia is, of course, the mortal enemy of the Roman Empire at this time. So they're, one recent author described them as like the Bolsheviks of the ancient world, kind of. So what's his response? Well, his response, again, is this argument he gets from Plato, which is that evil is really the absence of good. So a bad cow, for example, is a cow that doesn't give you milk. Okay, so what happened in the fall, for example, is not that we turned into being made out of evil or something like that. I mean, evil is not like a substance, right? Because God would have made it then, right? Rather, we were vitiated. The goodness that was within us there was goodness within us, then it was taken away. Okay, so evil is really the absence of the good. Okay, it's parasitic on the good. So this is kind of the argument here. Now, that's fine and dandy for upholding the doctrine of creation, but once you get to his understanding of justification, it's going to get a little bit more dicey. Okay, because if we're missing now bits and pieces, and God's grace is going to repair us, what will God's grace do? It will what? Okay, we're missing our bits and pieces. So
it gives them back.
Yeah, it gives them back. So justification will now be really sanctification. Right? So that's when we say people are completely sinful, Catholics hear, oh, they're Manichaeans. Right? So we don't mean it that way. What we mean is that our relationship with God is completely broken. It's not like part of us is still relating to God, okay, correctly. So that's what we do. We mean it relationally, okay. But they take it the way Augustine would talk about it, coming from Platonism, that if we still have some of our bits and pieces of goodness, we at least can do a little something, right? So that's how they think about it, right? Okay, so, and they're very nervous when you say that you can't do anything, because so they say, if you're completely sinful, then you'd be missing everything, and you just not exist at all, right? So that's how they think about it. So to them, that doesn't make any sense. Okay. So this is kind of this is his first one. This is kind of, he did write quite a bit about this, but this is not entirely what he's remembered for now. Second great controversy, and these are nice because they are the beginning of his career, then the middle of his career, and then the end of his career. So it works out very nicely. Is with Donatism. Now, just to refresh our memories, as we recall, in the early church, there's persecutions, and unlike in those wonderful biblical epics of the 1950s, most people do not get martyred. They actually just fall away and get off scot-free, right? So, leading to, of course, lots and lots of resentment. After the persecution is over, they want back in the church because, on the one hand, I mean, you can forgive them, right? You can forgive them, but then you're sitting next to someone whose family died because they wouldn't renounce the faith, whereas, you have equal status now with these people who, gave in, or something like that. Okay, so this was a problem. And it was an especially bad problem after the Diocletian persecution because it was so incredibly brutal that, people were very resentful afterwards. In particular, Diocletian, as we recall, targeted bishops and priests. He wanted them to renounce the faith, and so he would cut off their fingers and noses and things like that. That's why when you read contemporary descriptions of Nicaea, all the bishops, or quite a few of the bishops, are missing body parts when they come in. This is one of the reasons why Dan Brown's theory that they were somehow intimidated by Constantine just sitting there is completely ridiculous. Well, these are people who had been systematically tortured for the faith in the past. It's not likely that Constantine just staring at them is going to somehow do something.
So they were missing bits.
Yeah, they were missing noses and ears and things like that.
Literally.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. Yes, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, so this was so he targeted bishops and priests. In particular, what he targeted them for was giving up books of the church. So liturgy books and Bibles and things like that. That's why we don't have basically any liturgy from the early church. We have very little of it, I guess you could say. And we don't have a lot of, we have fewer manuscripts of the Bible than we possibly could have from before Constantine. And so these Donatists were followers of Cyprian. Donatus, who was their originator, was friend with Cyprian. And we remember from Cyprian that Cyprian taught, because he was influenced by Tertullian, who was a Montanist, that when you get ordained, it like a special kind of spiritual charisma comes upon you, okay? And so for sacraments to work that you administer, you have to keep this charisma in good working order. If you sin or are morally corrupt or you're heretical in any way, your sacraments don't work. Okay, so this is the general North African view that sacraments work on the basis of who administers them. Okay, so the Roman view was different. It was that sacraments work as God says they'll work. But these people say, no, they work if you have a non-heretical priest who's not morally corrupt administering them. Now to me, I don't know how they ever came up with this idea. It's totally crazy. How would you ever think that this would be a good idea? Because, okay, let's say somebody's been administering the Lord's Supper to you for 20 years and you find out, they have a girlfriend on the side or something like that, and somehow it didn't work all that time? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. How do you know they don't have bad thoughts in their head while they're baptizing you or something? Okay, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But you can see, again, after facing this huge persecution, why on an emotional level this would make a lot of sense. It makes even more sense, too, when you realize that all these Donatist people are the native Carthaginians, and the people in the Catholic Church, who they have separated themselves from, are Romans. Okay, so there's an ethnic thing going on here, kind of, as well. So that's Donatism. Any questions so far? I'm going through this too fast.
A little kind of like Anabaptist, sort of.
Yes. Well, I mean, think about it. I mean, that is kind of the idea of the Anabaptist model of the church. You get baptized to identify yourself as one of the people who really is, holy. I was actually even reading a pamphlet from some mega church. Well, it was somebody who I was working with at Marquette who had fallen away from the wells and was starting to go to a mega church. And in the pamphlet they said, we believe that only sincere believers should be part of the church. Who kind of self-identify. Like, oh, well, that's going to be interesting. I said, they're Donatists. So there it is.
What was his response to why he liked that church better?
Oh yeah, that was great. Yeah, so I was going through this. I'm like, this is heretical. This is heretical. I mean, you're wells. I mean, you believe in all this. These things in the Lutheran confessions. So why do you want to go to this church? He said, well, it makes me feel good.
Feeling.
Well, anyways, I have a lot of stories with that guy. But anyway. Okay, so what's Augustine's response? Well, he's in something of a bind, isn't he? Okay, because they're schismatics, meaning they've separated themselves from the larger church. So he doesn't want to say that what they're doing is okay, right? So he doesn't want to say that they can, gain salvation while, being alienated from the rest of the church. On the other hand, if he doesn't, then he would be essentially arguing the same thing that they're arguing, namely that if you're a heretical pastor, that your sacraments don't work. So he's in a bind. Okay, so here's a solution he comes up with. He splits the difference. Okay, so first of all, sacraments contain God's objective promise. So far, so good. And are valid, what he says, are ex operato operetto. Okay, so by virtue of being performed, irrespective of whether or not the priest is morally corrupt. Okay, so that's where that doctrine comes from. This is a very important doctrine for Catholics. Yes.
That's a different sense than what the Lutherans complain about in the confessions.
Well, they're not entirely fair to the Catholics, actually.
Okay.
The Catholics are wrong, but for maybe slightly different reasons.
Okay.
Than they...
And in fact, I remember a classmate arguing that actually that what
Yes.
Augustine says is right.
Well, we would agree that sacraments are valid, even if I don't believe in them. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
To partake in the blessing of them, of course, I have to. They are visible signs of the gospel, or they are visible manifestations of the gospel. I think that way of putting it. And so it's not like taking a pill. I'm trusting in the power of the gospel. So
right.
It encounters me. They tend to think of it as taking a pill. Now, of course, you can take the pill incorrectly. You can be in a state of mortal sin, but you don't have to really believe much about it correctly. In fact, I was going over this with my Reformation class students a couple of days ago. We were going through the Council of Trent on the decree on justification, and they think that we're, like really big meanies for insisting that people actually believe in the promises of the sacraments, because they really view it as something dependent on you. And so they're saying, like, oh, how harsh of them to really make people believe in the efficacy of the sacraments, to get the divine grace in them. But in any case.
So what would their opinion be of close communion?
They believe in close communion.
Okay, well, this
They officially.
baffles me, because we've had this discussion before,
Right.
what they actually think, so, anybody knows, I am unclear. Okay, so our position is that you can take the sacrament to a negative effect if you're in a faith, right? Acting it, don't matter. I'm unclear if they have that belief.
Well, no, if you're in a state of mortal sin, it's a negative effect because you don't get the benefits from it.
But that just means you're ecstatic. It doesn't mean that.
Right.
So it's not the same.
You're kind of already in big trouble, right? So this
You have to worsen yourself.
Well, it just means that you're not going up on the ascending
Right,
ladder.
but again, they think, right,
So
it wasn't saying it was the same.
Why not let anybody take it?
That is true.
So-
Because they would say, again, you express the unity of faith.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, but anyways. So sacraments are valid objectively. Now we agree with this, but of course you do have to trust in the promise. And they would say you have to be not in a state of mortal sin. Right? So, but that's a later theology. So he's just talking about whether or not sacraments are valid by virtue of being performed. Okay, so sacraments, even if they're administered by heretics and schismatics, again a point that we would agree, are valid. Now here he goes in another interesting direction that I don't think that we would agree with. Nevertheless, although valid, they don't actually work unless the priest or person receiving them is in fellowship with the wider Catholic Church. So for example, if the Donatists baptize you, that's valid, but it only becomes efficacious once you get into fellowship with the Catholic Church again. Right? So this is the same with the modern Catholic Church. Okay, if I went off and joined the Catholic Church, this will not happen, don't worry. They would not rebaptize me, right? But they would say, at least before Vatican II, I'm not certain. They would say that they would say it's half perfect. They say our sacraments are half perfect. But they don't really work.
Even that's too harsh. They wouldn't really say that either.
Right. Well, no, I'm telling you what Vatican II says. So, but yeah, okay, but they wouldn't rebaptize me, but they would say that really to have the full effect, let's say, or before Vatican II, to have any effect at all, I would have to enter into fellowship with the Catholic Church. Then all of a sudden, it would activate, right? My baptism would activate, right? So you see how he's working this out. So they've separated themselves from the Catholic Church, so he could say, the sacraments you're administering are not valid. And they would say, well, we agree that the sacraments you're administering aren't valid because you're heretics and schismatics and we're not. We're the Catholic Church. So he splits the difference. He says, well, yeah, they're validly performed, but they're not working. Okay, they're not working until you guys get back into fellowship with us. Okay, but anyways, he wasn't beyond using political violence to get them back into fellowship with him. He read the parable. Remember, with you go into the highways and the hedges to compel. So he says, "Oh, compel them to come in." So he used the government to compel them to come back into the church. Right. So, but anyways, okay. So that's one aspect of his answer. The second aspect is. The sacraments work not only because God promises that they work, but because they are performed by a priest who has been validly ordained. In ordination, an indelible character. This is God touches your soul in a certain way and conforms your soul to be a priest. Okay, in some way. Again, this is a correct Catholic teaching as well. And this is where it comes from. Is communicated to the soul of the priest. So you see how this works? Originally you have the Montanist view where all the clergy have to be these spirit-inspired prophets. Then it's like, well, they don't have to be spirit-inspired prophets, but they have to have this kind of spiritual reality conveyed to them in their ordination with Cyprian. And then he modifies it even further, saying, well, yes, they do, but it can't really be affected by whether or not they're heretics or schismatics or morally corrupt. So this character can't change, even if you're morally corrupt, and so it can't mess up the sacraments. Okay, so they're right that you do get some kind of spiritual charisma by getting ordained, but they're wrong that it can be lost through moral turpitude. Okay, so you guys say something?
I was just going to say something off the cuff.
Oh, okay.
Or being defrocked or anything like that.
Right. No, I mean, it doesn't even matter if you're defrocked or you quit the priesthood. Like, your soul is eternally conformed to this reality. Okay, so being a priest, being able to administer sacraments.
Is that why they don't get rid of? Never mind. I'll be quiet.
Anyways, well, right. That's for that stuff. That's why it's really important, because all these guys. Anyways, well, then you can see too why in the Middle Ages, why again, this is a totally boneheaded idea on the part of the Donatists that you can actually screw up your ability to administer sacraments because you're morally corrupt. But you can see why in the Middle Ages, for people like John Wycliffe, some of the proto-reformers, this was a really appealing idea to bring back. And so people like John Wycliffe agreed with Augustine 100% on the doctrine of grace. But then when you get to this, they say, well, corrupt priests can't administer correct sacraments. So it was a way of keeping the priests in line, essentially. Okay, so that's how he answers that one. Okay, and you can see how this has an interesting effect on Catholicism even to this day. Last controversy is the Pelagian controversy. This breaks out around about 410. Pelagius is a British monk, so he's of Celtic stock, and he comes down to Rome and becomes the toast of the town because he is teaching asceticism, which now is the new big thing. Before you could be systematically tortured by the Romans, but since that wasn't happening anymore, they decided to invent their own crosses, as Luther would say, by inventing monasticism. And so they came up with all kinds of clever ways of having monasticism. One way was chaining themselves to pillars and then standing in the sun for 20 or 40 years, okay, and not bathing, or your skin actually gets pretty bad if you do that. So there was Peter the Steglite. Is that the correct?
I think it's Simeon.
Oh, Simeon the Steglite. That's it. That's right. His pillar, you can still see part of his pillar in Syria to this day. People broke it, part of it out, and then grinded it up and made it into like medicinal potions and things like that. Some of them were hermits out in the desert fathers, and then other people were joined in monasteries. So you can have a living martyrdom that you yourself chose now. And so Pelagius is very popular. And one of the things that Pelagius teaches is that there is no negative effect of the fall on human beings. Adam and Eve, when they sinned, they just were bad examples to the rest of us, right? So he reads Romans 5. He actually wrote a commentary in the Epistle of Romans, which we do have, okay, where he says, where, it says Adam sinned and then it passed on to all his descendants. Well, that was it passed on to all his descendants because he gave them a bad example. Okay, so Jesus showed up. He died for our sins. He atoned for our sins, and we've got a clean slate. And now, since we aren't damaged by sin at all, if we just put our back into it, we can earn our way to heaven without any help of God at all. Okay, so. Well, what does he do with all those passages about God's grace? Well, God's grace is really his endowment of our human nature with the ability to, work for our salvation. So God as creator has endowed us with sufficient graces on our own to be able to achieve our salvation. Okay, so specifically what precipitated this is that there was a young noblewoman who was going to become a nun, and so they asked Pelagius to write a letter to her commending her on, what a good decision that she had made. And this letter got out where basically he was denying original sin. And St. Jerome, out in Bethlehem, and where he was translating the Bible into Latin, and Augustine got a hold of these letters, and they absolutely went through the roof. So Augustine, though, is the more consistent position on this. Okay, so how does he respond to this? First of all, Augustine argued that human free will exists in 4 separate states. Now, you'll recognize them because you'll probably basically agree. Well, there's a few details you might not agree with, but basically we would agree with him on this. So, first, human nature exists before the fall in a state of grace. So God gives grace. Grace is defined by Augustine not as God's favor, but as a kind of supernatural power that he gives to people. This is how it will be defined in Catholic thought, even to the present day. Okay? So that they're able to remain sinless. Now, in this state, they're not in what Augustine called a state of confirmation in the good. Okay? So they can sin, they could conceivably sin, but they can also prevent themselves from sinning. So they're able to sin, but able not to sin at the same time. When you're in a state of confirmation, God communicates to you a special grace so that you will never then fall away. So he says, before God created the world, he created the angels in a state where they weren't confirmed in the good. Okay, so some angels he confirmed in the good, who stuck with it. He gave them the grace of perseverance, so they were able to persevere in the good. Other ones he didn't give the grace of perseverance, so they fell into sin. But hey, they're confirmed in the evil, so, and then that became Satan and his angels. Same thing with human beings, too. Eventually, human beings would have been confirmed in the good, so they would never have been able to fall away, okay, in heaven. So, because, when we go to heaven, we'll have free will, but obviously we'll never fall away. Now, you might think, well, yeah, that's obvious. But, again, there were other Christian thinkers who thought, well, we'll still have free will, so maybe we'll still fall away. And so Origen, who's a Greek thinker, says we'll fall away an infinite number of times, and God will have to start up salvation history an infinite number of times in the future. So Augustine said, no, when we go to heaven, that'll be it. Right? So this is an interesting line of reasoning, and I think it's a correct line of reasoning, and apparently CPH agrees with me because I've read essentially the same line of reasoning in some theology books that they published. So this passes into all of Western theology, except for the special grace thing. We would disagree with that. We would say that human beings without God's power actually could be good on their own prior to the fall. Both Luther and Calvin would teach this. Okay, so after the fall. Now, after the fall, humans are not able not to sin. Okay, that's actually how he puts it. I forget the Latin phrase. It's kind of awkward in English, but we're not able not to sin. So this didn't mean that humans lacked free will totally. They are still able to, in ordinary decisions, right? If you wear a green jacket today and things like that, make decisions. What they can't decide is to turn themselves to God. They're just totally incapable of doing this. Okay? Moreover, since humans were made to glorify God, since we don't do everything to the glory of God, everything we do in this state of sin is sin. We can, in the eyes of other human beings, obviously do a few good things, like be good citizens. But in God's eyes, everything we do is wrong because we're not doing it to His glory. So eating breakfast cereal, is a sin. So essentially, so good on that. So also, it should be noted that human beings are not sinning in this state out of compulsion. There's no outside force sort of forcing them to sin, even though they can't prevent themselves from sinning. They sin because they want to sin. People do what they want to do, okay? So, again, if you read Luther's Bondage to the Will, this is another argument he himself makes. We're not being compelled to sin, but we can only sin because that's what we want to do. Necessity of immutability. We just desire sin. We're not the authors of our own desires. We just act out of our own desires. Okay? So that's how people are in a state of sin then. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So third, after baptismal regeneration, in this state, though a person that can still has the desire to sin, which is called concupiscence, so you want to sin, nevertheless, you're capable of fighting against this impulse. Okay, so even though human beings are not always successful. And as Augustine got older, he became more and more pessimistic about this. His parents, or his mother at least, still bought into this idea that that you shouldn't sin, or you shouldn't baptize someone until they were on their deathbed. So that's one of the reasons he didn't get baptized. So this older tradition that you can actually be morally perfect after baptism. There's actually an interesting scene in Book 1 of his Confessions where he's like 14 years old, and he's really, really, really sick. And his mother gets a pail of water, and they're going to come baptize him. Oh, but he's getting better. So take the water away. Anyways, but as he got older, after he'd been baptized, he comments in Book 9 of Confessions, hey, I still have really sinful dreams about my old girlfriends and things like that, okay? I still have really bad thoughts all the time, but, by the grace of God, I am what I am. So, and he says, actually, at the end of his life, a book called The Retractions, where he goes back through all his writings and finds things that he ultimately doesn't agree with that he wrote, okay? That in Romans 7, when Paul talks about sin dwelling within him, he said, well, I used to say that was Paul before his conversion, but that's Paul after his conversion, really. Okay, well, that's interesting. But he doesn't really do anything with it. Okay. So as he gets older, he increasingly becomes pessimistic, though, about human ability to avoid sin, okay, even after their regeneration. So now, beyond this, so God forgives our sins. We still sin. He makes reference to the Lord's Prayer. Beyond this, of course, we can do meritorious works. Works that are meritorious of salvation, because God gives us the ability to do this. God, as he puts it, crowns his own merits within us. Okay? So this is his understanding of justification. His understanding of justification is that it is, in fact, sanctification. And so God sanctifies people so that they can then do good works and merit salvation. Though, as we'll see, he predestined certain people to be able to be meritorious before him. Now, why does he think this? Because he read the Epistle to the Romans in Latin. The old Latin edition, okay? And Jerome translated it this way in the Vulgate as well. When Paul says we are justified by faith, okay, by grace through faith, the word that is translated is justificare, meaning made righteous. So God's grace is a power now that comes in and makes us righteous in ourselves, okay? And so then, it gives us ability to then do meritorious works to merit God's salvation. Okay, so.
What's the Greek?
Pardon me?
What's the Greek?
We are imputed as righteous, okay, by God's undeserved favor. Charos is a Greek for favor, right? So this will be a pivotal thing at the time of the Reformation, because Luther will go back to the original languages and say, hey, you've been reading in Latin for 1,000 years. So you got it wrong. Right. Oh, but unfortunately, you built an entire church structure on the assumption of Latin. So the Council of Trent had a wonderful solution. You can only read it in Latin, right? So, problem solved. But you can read it in the other languages. You just can only make official theological pronouncements in Latin. Okay, so then finally, of course, after we've merited our eternal salvation by the grace that God has given us, again, this will be the Catholic position up to the present time, we will go to heaven, and we will be confirmed in the good. And so even at that point, we will not be able to sin. We will not fall away. This is the state, of course, the good angels, as I mentioned before, are in as well. So again, we wouldn't agree with the meritorious stuff. We wouldn't agree with the idea that humans, before the fall, could avoid sinning because of special grace. But generally, this is pretty much what we would say, too. So Luther, who, after all, did read lots of Augustine and Augustine as well. Okay. Predestination? You bet. So because of this, he revives an idea that's been out of commission for a really long time in Christian thought, predestination. Of course, Paul talks about this in the New Testament in general. Christian thinkers after the 2nd century were not keen on it because the Gnostics talked about people being either soulish or spirituals, and they were sort of predetermined this way. And so they really didn't like this Gnostic idea, so they just dropped it entirely, okay, and really tried to play up the claims of free will. So if you talk to Eastern Christians, they'll basically talk to you about how predestination is Gnostic, and they'll play up the claims of free will too. But Augustine brings it back because he has to read Paul quite a bit for the sake of this controversy. So he teaches that God, out of what he calls the mass of perdition, okay, so we're all infected with original sin. Somehow we're infected with original sin. We don't really know how that happens. It could be that the soul of Adam is somehow passed down to us. The damage to Adam's body and soul is passed down to us, and so that's why we're subject to original sin. Bible doesn't specifically say. It could be, he also says it sometimes, that by the lust involved in reproduction, there's a chain reaction of sin that then transmits original sin to us, because he claimed that, well, prior to the fall we wouldn't have enjoyed sex. We would just think about God all the time, okay? And so when you have sexual intercourse, you're not thinking about God or philosophy or important things. And so, hence, it messes up your ability to do that. So it obviously must be a manifestation of sin. So it's a form of punishment of sin because it interferes with your ability to think about big intellectual thoughts. Okay. Some people attribute this to his sort of dalliances as a young man, and so he had this like very negative kind of attitude towards sexuality. Well, most early Christians had a really negative attitude towards sexuality, so this is not unique to him.
Is this that kind of not being controlled by passions
yes.
idea?
Well,
right?
Going back to Stoicism.
And
yeah.
wasn't he this way about music? Music could be too enjoyable? Or
I don't. I never heard that. It wouldn't surprise me, but
okay.
I've never heard that. No. Oh, you did say that. Okay.
So like church music, I think it's supposed to not be enjoyable.
Yeah, I didn't. I never read that. That's interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, another big thing that early Christians were against were second marriages. Okay, so your wife dies at childbirth. Okay, and so you shouldn't get married again, because if you get married again, it's just because you want to have sex. You've had your children already. That's the only reason to get married. Okay, so you can't have second marriages. They were really, really against second marriages. So that was one thing they were also against. So his generally negative attitude towards sexuality is actually quite characteristic of early Christianity in general. Up until really the Reformation. Okay, so God has chosen a specific number of the elect. How did he come by the number? Okay, well, in the beginning, God created a perfect number of angels, but of course, He didn't give all of them the gift of perseverance in the good. So a bunch of them fell away. So He has to make up now for the angels that fell away, and so He's elected that certain number. Okay, so He's selected some of us out of the mass of perdition, and then the rest of us, we have it coming, right? There's no question of good and evil. I mean, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, but there are no good people, so of course bad things happen. The real mystery is, why does God elect the elect? Well, here's the rationale. Right? So he has to. Maybe he'll exceed that number. Maybe he'll go beyond it by His grace. But really, He just needs that number, and then He sort of passes over the rest of everybody else, and they end up just damning themselves, right? Because they can't do anything to merit God. They can't cooperate with grace. Grace is irresistible, in the way that Calvin taught it. Okay, so they're just sort of left to their own devices. So, now why does God set everything up like this? And this comes out in his theory of history in a book he wrote called The City of God. The City of God is a book he begins to write to defend the Christian church against Roman pagans who are saying, okay, Rome was doing really, really well when we were pagan, but now we became Christian, and now we're falling apart. So doesn't that mean that the old gods were actually the real gods, and the Christian God is actually, not so good for us? And Augustine essentially points out to them, well, Rome was doing badly long before Christianity came around, and if it's suffering now, it's because of all the crummy things that it did in the past, mainly because the Romans acted like a bunch of criminals. But then he begins to launch into this long sort of defense of, or a long philosophy, we might say, of human history. And what he says is that God has set up world history so that there's always a city of man and a city of God. City of man are people in human history who are not the elect. They're the people who are sinful and they're centered on themselves. And the people in the city of God, that's the church throughout the ages, starting with the good angels and then going on to Adam and Eve and then down to us, are centered on the love of God. And God sets up human history this way because when you have two pieces of cloth that are of contrasting colors like red and green, you kind of sew them close to each other, the contrast between them is really, really beautiful. And if you have a song where you have words where there's kind of a dissonance, that's kind of beautiful as well, or a poem maybe. And so God has set up salvation history as this long kind of contrast between good and evil, okay, between the good and the bad, as kind of something beautiful for him to look at. Okay, so he has divvied everyone up in this particular kind of way. So that also explains why God allowed evil, right, to come about. So I obviously don't find this very convincing. I mean, you can tell the people at Auschwitz that they are part of the beautiful mosaic of God, and I don't think they feel particularly good about it, right? But in any case, so you get predestination then. We are almost done, but which is good because I'm almost finished. But, and how does this affect the church? Well, it also means that beyond talking about the church as an institution, he begins to talk about a visible and invisible church, right? Okay, so the real church is all those who sincerely believe in whom God has elected. This isn't visible, right? Because you can't look into people's hearts and minds. He thought it was maybe 10% of everybody who really attends on a Sunday, right?
Are real?
Are for real.
Are real.
Are for real, yes.
Yeah.
About 10% maybe. Luther and Calvin thought about the same number. Luther said 1 in 1,000 probably. So. It's true.
Wow.
So you can't look into their hearts. So the elect are not visible. You could gauge it by good behavior, but hey, people who are not Christians can be good too, right? In terms of at least their external behavior. So everybody should be part of the church. Okay, so just herd everybody in the church because nobody becomes elect without contact with the means of grace. So he said, look at all the pagan Germans who are invading the empire now. Herd them into the church. They may not be elect, but maybe their children are. So just baptize everybody and herd everybody into the church. So this will essentially be the policy again until relatively modern times. If you're Baptist, though, right, again, when the Baptist theology, the Anabaptist theology begins in the 16th century, and then Baptist theology proper in the 17th century, what you actually are assuming is that you can know who the elect are, right, or at least people who have self-identified as the elect. Okay, so you want to separate out from the rest of society and then identify yourself as a special mark. Okay, so it's specifically rejecting Augustine's claim, which Luther and Calvin both shared, that you cannot know who the elect actually are, at least by looking at them. Okay, so there's a few tensions? Well, yes, to say the least. So first of all, there's a couple of problems. First of all is the one I brought up already. If human beings are by nature good, simply corrupted, then why don't they have at least some kind of capacity left over to cooperate with God's grace? Okay, so maybe I can't go the distance, but maybe I could do something if God offered me his grace, because I still have some good components left in me, right? So I know Augustine would say, no, you're kind of like a car that's missing the engine. I mean, you're still a car, but you're missing the engine. But later on, this gives wiggle room to medieval theologians, particularly Franciscan ones, to say, well, no, I mean, you're not that bad off. Okay, you can do something. If you can do a little something, then God would probably say, you should do just that little bit, and then I'll come in with my grace and elevate you to the next level. Okay, so that's one problem. Secondly, and this is kind of the big one, if the sacraments are effective and valid, then why don't they work on everyone? Okay, so remember he says in the Donatus Controversy that the sacraments are objectively valid and that they do really contain grace, but then not everybody, when they come into contact with them, it doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't work on everybody, right? So, in other words, if grace is present in them absolutely, and people can't resist divine grace, shouldn't everybody automatically get converted when they come into contact with the sacraments? Okay, well, so that's a problem, right? So how he kind of solved it is this, is he said that when you get baptized, you get regenerated, okay? So everybody gets this grace of regeneration and baptism. but only people God has elected get this grace of perseverance. That's holding on until the end. So if you know anything about Calvinism, tulip, P is perseverance of the saints, right? So they're getting this from Augustine, right? So that's where they get the idea of the grace of perseverance. And then lastly, if the elect are elected by God through an immutable and eternal decree, why do you need an institutional church and sacraments to begin with? Right? Because God just says that you're elect. Well, maybe you need some visual aids to tell you you're elect. Right? So,
but they're telling people that aren't elect that they're elect.
Mm-hmm. So, right, so, so that's how you get Calvinism, right? So,
yeah.
So do the elect know they're elect?
In Augustine's case, you just have to sort of work on it until the end. It would be presumptuous for you to say that you are going to make it all the way.
So therefore, everybody's elect.
No.
Or no, you're not sure.
No, nobody is actually 100% sure. I mean, so.
So you're like in limbo.
Right, so you should just keep on working and participating in the sacraments of the church and doing meritorious works and hope that you're going to make it in the end. So, okay. Right, that's the Catholic view, right? So that'll carry over. With Calvin, later on, who will appropriate this, he will be influenced by Luther, and of course by reading the New Testament too. And he says, well, yes, you can know. Initially, he says, in the 1536 edition of the Institutes, well, you just sort of know, right? And then they said, well, but wait a second. we need to know something a little bit better than that. So by 1559 in the Institutes, he's like, well, maybe if you have faith and you do lots of good works and you participate in the sacraments, you're probably elect. So
Probably.
right. So but there becomes a distinction in the Middle Ages between what they call the will of the sign and then the will of good pleasure. So externally, the sacrament may tell you it's going to give you something, save you, but maybe you're not one of the elect. So maybe God is holding out on you. So, anyways, so as you can see, then this will lead to sort of different understandings of the church and different understandings of sacraments. Because again, if you think that election is this eternal, immutable decree, why do you need sacraments which ostensibly in Catholicism are supposed to, get your spiritual juices flowing so that you can then merit salvation, right? Wouldn't you just need a visual aid to tell you that you had been chosen? Which is why the Reformed tend to think of the sacraments as kind of visual aids, right? So by the 800s, you have Calvinism and Catholicism in utero, essentially, by this debate between these guys, Robertus and Retramnus. Robertus believes that there's free will and that the real presence is in the Lord's Supper. Retramnus believes in predestination, absolute double predestination, and he believes the Lord's Supper is simply a symbol. Okay, so these are the competing positions now you get out of this, because again, Augustine has these competing doctrines. He has a realistic view of the sacraments, an institutional view of the church, and then he has this doctrine of the church as a secret group of the spiritually elect, who are chosen by God's immutable election. So hence, we get our money quote from Benjamin Warfield. Calvinism is Augustine's doctrine of predestination at the expense of his doctrine of the church. Roman Catholicism is Augustine's doctrine of the church at the expense of his doctrine of predestination.
So maybe to wrap up, so what's the Lutheran take on?
The Lutheran take on it is that we do not separate the visible from the invisible. That God does elect us, but God elects us through the visible means of grace. So it all goes back to Jesus being the Son of Man, right? So Jesus is God. The fullness of God's glory is communicated to his human nature. So what Jesus says as a man is identical with what Jesus says as God. So you can be certain of God's electing activity in relationship to you because Jesus is present in the means of grace, telling you that he has already made his decision about you. So what's the problem with Augustine's theology is he never relates it to Christ. He has an insufficient doctrine of Christ. Okay, that's fascinating. Right. So the two natures are always sort of held like hovering close to one another, and this is the problem with the Reformed and the Catholics as well. So the real solution to all these problems that arise from Augustine's position would be actually the Eastern Christology, where the idea is that God's glory is communicated in its fullness to the human nature, the way that we talk about it. Okay? But they didn't have that intellectual resource, and so, hence, Western theology is divided between Reformed and Catholic ideas, because you either go in the direction of predestination or you go in the direction of institutionalization of grace, right? So, and we're able to hold them both together with our doctrine of Christ. So, anyways, so that's the end of that. I guess it's anticlimactic. Yes?
No, that wasn't
I
anticlimactic.
was thinking of my Baptist friends that talk about, the age of accountability, as far as, for someone to become baptized, and not baptizing children.
Right.
I mean, isn't that, in a sense, isn't that semi-Pelagian? I mean, with that idea that, that there's this age where you do become knowledgeable in your sin, or,
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
Pelagian-esque, I wouldn't say this.
It's semi-Pelagian, yeah. So there's really not much difference between semi-Pelagianism and Pelagianism, because if you contribute anything to your salvation by works, then it all becomes dependent on you either ways. Yeah, I would definitely say that's true. I mean, original sin, the classical doctrine of original sin presupposes that, people are corrupted from their conception. I mean, this is what David said from, in sin my mother bore me, so. Any other questions?
Was it your doing or their doing? They don't seem to quote much scripture.
Who are you
I mean,
referring to?
in all of this, it isn't like somebody makes a statement and then he has a
proof
text.
They do quote. I just didn't give them to you because for the sake of time.
Yeah. Okay.
So for the thing with the angels, for example, the perfect number of the angels uses Deuteronomy chapter 32 in the Greek version. So they have many of these interpretations of Scripture we would agree with. Others we would find really unusual. So I would say. So. Any other questions?
Well, thank you so much.
This was,
Yes.
it was a lot of fun.